In news that will surprise absolutely no one, General Motors and the government are disagreeing about something, and this time it's what an SUV is. Welcome back to All Cars, y'all. I'm John, and I will admit up front, I actually saw this information on Auto News and on Clean Technica. And what this is that General Motors is disagreeing with the IRS on how the Cadillac Lyriq is being classified. IRS is currently saying it's not an SUV, and this is important because of the upcoming tax credits. So let's roll this back a little bit and kind of talk about how we got to this moment. First off, several decades ago, back in the 60s, 70s, the Clean Air Act was passed, the EPA came along, and they set the standards for emissions and for gas mileage. And to do that, they had to classify vehicles, trucks, cars, SUVs, things like that. Now, with the Inflation Reduction Act, Congress has agreed that there are tax credits that can go out based on a few different things: where the car is manufactured, where the parts, the materials for the battery comes from, and price limits for whether it's a car at $55,000 or an SUV at $80,000. Now, the Cadillac Lyriq starts right in between there at about $63,000. Now, an informal poll this morning shows the vast majority of people see the Cadillac Lyriq as an SUV. It's marketed as an SUV. It looks like an SUV, and the IRS says it's not an SUV, of course. So what's happened is when the Inflation Reduction Act was passed, Congress gave the IRS the authority to determine these classifications, write the rules for how these tax credits are going to be handled. And which makes some sense. The IRS apparently reached out to their buddies over at the EPA, and they've been in constant communication saying, hey, what are your classifications? Send those over to us. Let us take a look at them. Well, what this means is that it has to fall under that $55,000 threshold, not the $80,000 threshold for an SUV. Needless to say, GM is a little concerned about this. And I think this is actually bringing up a bigger issue that's going to be discussed in a lot more detail of what's happened at the EPA over all of these decades and literally the nonsensical classification system they've come up with. Now, EPA says that, of course, when they've come up with these classification systems in the past, they've always worked with the industry, but it still begs, how did we get to this point? And what got my attention and made me do this video is a couple of examples. So start with the Volkswagen ID4. It looks like an SUV, but it is actually classified as a passenger car by the EPA if it has one electric motor. But if it has two motors, it's considered an SUV. Similarly, the Tesla Model Y has two motors, but is classified as a passenger car. If it seats 5, but if it seats 7, it's classified as an SUV, and I imagine there's far more examples of this. Now, the Treasury Department says that they are going very strictly by the book in using fuel economy standards, quote, which are pre-existing and long-standing EPA regulations that manufacturers are very familiar with. But they also say they are addressing GM's concerns with the Treasury, and that they will hope that forthcoming guidance on vehicle classifications will provide the needed clarity to consumers and dealers as well as regulators and manufacturers. Basically what this means is they need to figure their stuff out, because how can you have a car like the ID4, which I consider more of an SUV, be a car if it has one motor, and an SUV it has two? I don't know. I don't understand how they came up with this, and maybe they think that this is crystal clear. It's been long-standing, and the industry had a say in the matter, but we have a mixed-up world where is it a wagon? Is it a tall wagon? I mean, like the Subaru Outback. Is it a car that's tall, or is it a short SUV? Nobody's asking me for my opinion about it, but it's very interesting that because now we've got up to $7,500 that could be thrown out there, this is becoming very critical. And I think we're going to see a lot more of this kind of churning in the classifications during this process while the Treasury Department writes the rules for how they're going to handle distributing the tax credits. Just wanted to give you an update today, guys. Let me know your thoughts below, but surprise, GM and the government don't see eye to eye, and the government over decades has come up with really convoluted rules that don't seem to make any sense to the average person. Thanks for being here.